4 years after Great Britain left the European Union, the last political tangle that got tangled up in the dissolution of the diverse ties between London and Brussels has finally been unraveled. The conditions under which Northern Ireland can remain in the EU internal market on the one hand, and that seems to be in order, and there will be no hard customs border on the island of Ireland, and on the other hand, it will not jeopardize its status as part of the United Kingdom, and they do have a government. The relief at the success was felt in almost all political camps in London and Belfast at the time, but the cause of the arduous undertaking was not worth mentioning on the country's political stage. Only Boris Johnson, who carried out the exit as Prime Minister at the time, reported from his political sidebox, 4 years after Brexit, Great Britain is celebrating the restoration of democratic power over its own laws and rules. However, the list of relevant successes was quite sparse. Better standards for animal welfare, tax cuts on hygiene products, more flexibility for new sectors and industries, and many global free trade agreements. And this indefinite amount includes some free trade agreements with former British dominions such as Australia and New Zealand. Negotiations with Canada have already failed, and the most important agreement, the one with the United States, is missing. Initial discussions were soon interrupted indefinitely, and at least there's now it's not a trade agreement, but a memorandum with Florida. But calculations on how many gross national products points Great Britain would be better off if Brexit had not happened remain rather vague, and even if stark economic effects sometimes emerge, for example, if certain foods are missing from supermarket shelves. It is a plausible assumption that delivery bottlenecks also arise because producers prefer to sell their goods more unbureaucratically within the EU when there is a shortage, and instead of having to laboriously send them to the British Isles. So while the economic successes that were painted in bright colors have not materialized, the construction of the hospitals, which were supposed to be financed by the billions in EU contributions saved, is also lagging far behind schedule. Politically and socially serious failures stand out here. And this is especially true for the promise of taking back control. The promise of take back control referred to many things, including the return of the British standard for beer glasses, but above all to the massive reduction in immigration. But instead of the target number of 100,000 that was set by then Prime Minister David Cameron more than a decade ago, or the few 100,000 mark that Johnson promised in his election campaign 5 years ago, well, the latest statistics for the past year show a net influx of around 750,000. The number is made up of legally entered workers, students, and family members of ethnic minorities. The 36,000 that were smuggled across the English Channel last year are hardly significant in comparison. There is political will behind all forms of regular immigration. Refugees from Ukraine and Hong Kong enjoy asylum. The workforce is supposed to cover the shortage in specialist professions, but also in general healthcare. And foreign students help finance British universities through high fees. And family reunification takes place due to this of interpretations of human rights that also apply in Great Britain still, just reminding you. And while hundreds of thousands from all corners of the former Commonwealth are not discouraged by laborious visa procedures, many Europeans who were once able to learn and work in Great Britain without bureaucracy are now annoyed by the new hurdles. The number of, for example, German-British school trips and youth exchanges has fallen by 3/4 because of the passport requirements for everyone and the visa requirements for Turkish or Syrian classmates, for example. So, the ruling Conservatives are now more likely to keep quiet about the most important act of their time in government than to be proud of Brexit. The Labour Party, hoping for a change of government, announces changes in its relationship with the EU, but no return. And it remains unclear they need many of the voters in the north of England that they lost to Boris Johnson in 2019 because he promised to implement Brexit. And the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, recently stated that his favorite melody was Beethoven's Ode to Joy. I think you know that song. In surveys, the British Labour Party is well ahead of the ruling Tories. If they win the election, they want to invest also significantly less money in environmental projects, not just ignore Brexit. And according to Labour, the government has driven the economy to the wall. That means that Britain's opposition Labour Party has drastically cut its green investment plans, and as the Labour Party, which is well ahead of the ruling Conservatives in the polls, announced that if it wins the election, it no longer wants £28 billion a year, just about 23.7 billion over a period of 4 years, and that's for the environment and the investment in climate-friendly projects. The goal of generating electricity in Great Britain from climate-friendly sources by 2030 would still be met, at least according to a statement from Labour. The heart of the project, known as the Green Prosperity Plan, is the establishment of a state-owned company called Great British Energy, with which the energy system can be brought back under the control of the people of Great Britain. And Labour wants to finance the plans in part by increasing the excess profits tax for energy company. The reason for the change in plans is that the government has driven the economy to the wall, as they put it, and Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is planning to use the country's credit card to the limit. That's part of the Labour statement. That's not what I said. However, the British media suspected that the decision, which was described as a U-turn, was due to election campaign considerations, as Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservatives wanted to make the plans as a target of their criticism. A Greenpeace representative in Great Britain accused Starmer of falling over like a house of cards in the wind. And meanwhile, Sunak is still Prime Minister. But Sunak is considered the richest Prime Minister in British history, and he has now disclosed his tax return for 22 and 23, and the money for his parliamentary mandate only makes up a small part of this. The British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak recently earned more than £2.2 million a year and paid a good £500,000 in taxes for it. This emerges from the tax return for the 22-23 financial year, which the Conservative politician published on Friday. The Daily Mirror newspaper reported that his income had increased by around £300,000 compared to the previous year. And according to the letter from his tax advisors, Sunak received a good £84,000 as money for his MP mandate and £55,000 in salary as a member of the government. By far the largest share was capital gains from an investment fund. Sunak received almost £1.8 million there, and there was also a further £300,000 in dividends and interest. The whole Sunak couple's fortune is estimated at £529 million, and the former investment banker is considered the richest prime minister in British history. At the beginning of October 23, the Sunday Times newspaper estimated that the assets of Sunak and his wife Akshata Murthy are at this total of £529 million. But this is largely due to Murthy. She holds just under 1% of the shares in the Indian IT giant Infosys, which her father co-founded. Sunak has repeatedly come under fire for his wife's financial interests because, among other things, he did not disclose his holdings in a company that benefited from state funding. She did. The Prime Minister's wealth always plays a role in the political debate as well. And the couple, who have 2 daughters together, own a listed house in Sunak's Northern England constituency of Richmond, as well as 2 houses in posh West London and 1 in Santa Monica in California. Great Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has now also justified himself for backing into a bet on his planned deportation policy to Rwanda. The reporter Piers Morgan told Sunak in an interview that he would bet £1,000 to a refugee organization that Sunak would not get anyone on one of the planes before the next election. Would you take this bet, is what Morgan asked in the video published last Monday, extending his hand to Sunak. The Prime Minister then emphasized that of course he wanted to get people on these planes and gave Morgan his hand. The Conservative British government wants to deport people who come to the country irregularly to Rwanda, regardless of where they actually come from. In doing so, they intend to scare people away, and Great Britain is paying the African country a sum of millions for this. Sunak responded to criticism of the bet in a BBC interview now. Sunak, who previously worked as an investment banker, said he was not a fan of betting and was completely surprised by the offer. He just wanted to make it clear that he was behind the project. The opposition Labour MP Jonathan Ashworth criticised the bet. Not many people who are faced with rising mortgages, bills and food prices will spend £1,000, he said, according to the PA news agency. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.